I'm a guy called Space. It's AM 640 Toronto Radio. I want to welcome you if you're driving around town listening to AM 640 Toronto Radio on your car, if you're at work listening, or if you're dialed into Star Choice on Channel 865 listening, or if you are in front of your Mac or your PC, logged on to 640toronto.com, picking up the live audio streaming wherever you are in the world. I welcome you in. We're talking about the mystery of the UFO and demystifying it, and connecting it with some of the experiments and some of the research and development that was going on in the later years of the Nazi operation in Germany, where they were on the cutting edge of jet engines, almost had an atom bomb. There were many things. And then after the war in 1947, two huge events. The sighting of the very first and most believable sighting of a UFO by a couple of farmers, a man and his wife in Oregon, who took a couple of snapshots. And, of course, it went right around the world after Life magazine picked up on it. And was not deemed to be a hoax, and I don't believe it was a hoax either. I believe it was the real thing, but I don't believe that they were extraterrestrials flying it. I believe they were men. And other things that are close to men that I will touch on before the show close tonight here on A View from Space on AM 640 Toronto Radio. And the second event in 1947 was just 1 month later, when Kenneth Arnold was flying his own aircraft and saw 9 UFOs through the Cascade Mountains, zigzagging and flitting through the sky. And then these fireballs that I've been describing that some of the Allied pilots, bombing pilots in the Second World War, near the close of the Second World War, saw in the night sky over Germany. They were incredible objects in the sky for these pilots, and they were very afraid to put them on their flight reports after the flight, because a lot of them were taking a lot of, they were the brunt of jokes that they were seeing unidentified flying objects. And I was stating earlier, if you were born and lived before 1950, no one, absolutely no one in their right mind believed that there were UFOs, that they existed. I mean, you were an idiot if you thought that. But after 1950 and on, it was exactly the opposite. You were an idiot if you didn't believe, or even naive to think that we were alone in the universe, because of such an incredible, intense brainwashing that we were subjected to through stories, books, these sightings that I've been talking about, and through television shows and movies, of course, showing that man could travel through the stars. And a lot of people still believe that NASA's black magic spell that they're casting is actually true, that we're actually going to Jupiter and places like Saturn. That is absurd. If they can't stop spam on your computer, you cannot put a machine on a moon that's orbiting Jupiter. Sorry, not buying it. They're black magic. That's what they are, black magic. Albert Einstein himself will tell you mathematics is a lie. You can make numbers say anything you want. Check out what's going on in the stock market. They're just numbers, but they got people doing certain things because that number is a certain number. It's absolutely unbelievable, the power of numbers. So as these fireballs approached the Allied pilots in the Second World War, the halo produced by the engine gave the impression of enormous size. They had the effect of unnerving these pilots even more. And as the fireball approached, the pilots didn't fire on them for fear of being caught in a gigantic explosion. In fact, the devices did carry an explosive charge that would destroy them in an event of a capture, in addition to an ingenious feature that would ensure a quick escape in the event of an attack by an Allied aircraft. Underneath this fireball was its armored outer shell. Each fireball contained a thin sheet of electrically insulated aluminum. Should a bullet pierce the armor, contact would be made between it and the aluminum sheet and would close a circuit, activating a vertical maximum acceleration device and taking the craft out of weapons range in just a matter of seconds, like that. The fireball was constructed at the Henschel Rax Aeronautical Assembly Plant in Wiener Neustadt, Germany, according to a witness who saw them being test-flown even in daylight. The craft looked like shining discs spinning on the vertical axis, and at night like huge burning globes. Hermann Göring inspected the progress of the Fireball project a lot of times, hoping the mechanical principles could be applied to an even bigger offensive saucer-shaped aircraft. He got his wish, because the Kugelblitz, meaning ball lightning automatic fighter, the second authentic prototype after the Fireball to the present day flying saucers, and the first example of the jet lift aircraft, otherwise known as the British Harrier jet. That's where that technology is now. In 1952, a former Luftwaffe engineer named Rudolf Schreiber gave a series of interviews to the West German press and claimed to have designed an aircraft strikingly similar to the Kugelblitz. Schreiber was an engineer and a test pilot for the Heinkel factory in Eiger. In 1941, he began to toy with the idea of an aircraft that could take off vertically, which eliminated the need for runways, of course, which were always vulnerable to enemy bombing. So even in war-torn areas, you could actually land a jet. That's what the Harrier's job is, to get into places where just a helicopter could, but a helicopter doesn't have the firepower like a Harrier would. By June the following year, he built and flew a working model of this design, obviously the forerunner to the Harrier, the British Harrier, and began on a full-sized 15-foot version. In mid-1944, Schreiber was transferred to the BMW plant near Prague, Czechoslovakia, where he was joined by an engineer from the rocket site at Peenemünde named Walter Minth. Another engineer named Klaus Habermohl joined them, and an Italian physicist from the aeronautical complex at Riva del Garda, Dr. Giuseppe Paluzzo, joined them. Together, they built an even larger piloted version of the disc, featuring a domed pilot's cabin sitting at the center of a circular set of multiple wings driven by a turbine engine mounted on the disc's vertical axis. The German disc program went under the title Project Saucer, which was W.A. Harbinson also looked at as the title for his excellent 5-novel series inspired by the Nazi UFO connection theory. According to the military historian Major Rudolf Lusar, Schreiber's disc was a wide-surface ring which rotated around a fixed cupola-shaped cockpit. A cupola is just a dome. The ring contained adjustable wing discs, which could be brought into the right position for the takeoff of straight-up or horizontal flight. The Model 3 flying disc had a diameter of 138 feet and a height of 105 feet. It was large. According to Schreiber, the finished disc was ready for testing and flying early in 1944, but it was destroyed, supposedly, by its builders to prevent it from falling into the hands of the advancing Allied armies. Yeah, right. The Illuminati controlled both sides of World War II. They had inside people on each side. The Red Cross was actually the one that could go into no man's land and be the messengers. So whatever the Germans were undertaking, and whatever the Americans and British were undertaking, and the Russians, the ones that ran it all, knew all. And so all of the research and development belonged to them, and they of course collected it. Renato Vesco states that a highly advanced supersonic disc-shaped aircraft called the Kugelblitz was indeed test-flown near Nordhausen, an underground rocket complex, in February of 1944, also known as the V-7. This machine was said to have climbed a height of 37,600 feet in just 3 minutes and reached a speed of over 1,000 nautical miles per hour. This craft and the technicians who built it were apparently seized by the Russians and taken to Siberia, where the disc project continued under Soviet control, while Vesco concedes the hard evidence for a German flying disc program is very hard to actually track down and give proof of. He does say that the senior official of a 1945 British technical mission revealed that he had discovered German plans for an entirely new and deadly development in air warfare. These plans must have obviously gone beyond normal jet aircraft designs, because both sides already had jet-powered aircraft in production and operational by the end of the war. More to come on AM 640 with a mystery revealed of UFOs on A View from Space on AM 640 Toronto Radio. Spaceman, AM 640 Toronto Radio, with the mystery of the UFO revealed tonight on A View from Space. I was just talking about the Kugelblitz, which was a machine, a V-7 machine that could climb to a height of 37,000 plus in just 3 minutes and reach speeds of over 1,200 miles an hour. Apparently seized by the Russians, taken to Siberia after the war, and continued. So who knows what they have today? Absolutely mind-blowing. Because these plans that they had way back in the 40s and 50s had already gone way beyond normal jet aircraft designs. Because obviously in the Korean War in the 50s, both sides, the Russians and Americans, had jet power. The Americans flew the Sabre. And Schreiber, who was an eyewitness, who died some 15 years after the war, was convinced that the large numbers of post-war UFO sightings were evidence that his designs had been built and developed. On May 2nd of 1980, another man claimed to be of the German press, also said that he worked on the Project Saucer. Heinrich Fleibner, then 76 years old, told Neue Press magazine that he was a technical consultant on a jet-propelled disc-shaped aircraft that had been built at Piemont from parts manufactured in other locations. Fleibner also claimed that Göring had been the overseer to the project and planned to use the disc as a courier plane, but that the Wehrmacht had supposedly destroyed most of the planes in the face of the Allied advance. These plans, of course, went into the hands of the Illuminati, who control both sides, had connections deep within the leadership of both sides. According to Harbinson, the notes and drawings for Fladner's flying saucer, first registered in West Germany on March 27, 1954, were assigned to Transoceanic Los Angeles, California on March 28th the following year, and registered with the United States Patent Office on June 7, 1960. According to Vesco, the Austrian inventor Victor Schauberger, after being kidnapped by the Nazis, designed a few disc-shaped aircraft for the Third Reich, beginning 1938 to 1945. These saucers were powered by what Schauberger called liquid vortex propulsion. If water or air is rotated into a twisting form of oscillation, known as colloidal, he said a buildup of energy results which, with immense power, can actually cause levitation, can actually cause the machine to lift, almost looking as if it defies gravity. Whether this bizarre form of propulsion is workable, I don't know. But once again, the Americans seem to have taken many of Schauberger's documents at the end of the war, with the Russians taking what was left and blowing up his apartment when they finished. Schauberger supposedly went to America in the 50s to work on a top-secret project in Texas for the United States government, although this unspecified project was apparently not particularly successful, so they say. Schauberger died in 1958, reportedly saying on his deathbed, "They took everything from me, everything. I don't even own myself." There's no doubt that radical aeroform designs were being tested in and around this time. For example, the Messerschmitt 163A, powered by a liquid fuel Walter rocket, and was given its first powered flight in August 1941. It was clocked at speeds at over 600 miles an hour, nearly twice as fast as the average speed of a fighter aircraft at that time. A second version, the ME-163B, was built with a more powerful motor. The design was not perfected, but until mid-1944, when approximately 370 of them were built and deployed throughout Germany in a last-ditch attempt to defeat the British and their allies. The Royal Air Force and the United States Air Force aircrews who encountered them commented in their reports on how fast and dangerous these craft were. On a lot of occasions, the ME-163s were so fast that the Allied air gunners had no chance to deal with them. But the ME-163 could only stay in a combat situation for about 25 minutes. After that, it had no power left, and the relatively small number prevented them from having much success against the Allied advance. A question of too little too late, or was it a question of holding back the Germans to get the idea and then end it and take the ideas? If the Germans did succeed in producing a piloted flying disc, what happened to it? Spaceman, AM 640, Toronto Radio. Dr. Hans Kammler, the SS Obergruppenführer, who towards the end of the war had access to all areas of secret air armament projects, has the answer. Kammler worked on the V-2 rocket project along with Werner von Braun, who, as I've said, would later head NASA's Apollo Moon program, and Luftwaffe Major General Walter Dornberger, who would later become vice president of the Bell Aircraft Company in the United States. And Heinrich Himmler planned to separate the SS from the Nazi Party and state control through the establishment of a group of business and industrial fronts, making it independent of the state budget. Hitler approved that proposal in early of 1944. And you know what? That's exactly how the CIA was set up in America. It was taken right out of the German Hitler SS playbook. By the end of the war, Dr. Hans Kammler decided to use V2 rocket technology and scientists as bargaining chips with the British, Americans, and the Russians. The war was ending. Things got a little crazy. Dr. Hans Kammler somehow, some way, made a deal. I'm back with that next on AM 640, Toronto Radio. This is A View from Space. I'm Space. I'm the Spaceman. You can email me at space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. I have to say the emails that I have been getting are very knowledgeable and absolutely mind-blowing. Tonight's show, UFOs, I have never, ever had on as a show topic. Mentioned it occasionally, and when I did mention, it was always men are behind this, not extraterrestrials, because I believe that we are absolutely alone in the universe or universes. I believe it's a concerted effort by the elite rich, the Illuminati, to trick us into believing that there is a super race, someone that is far greater than we. And of course, we already know their motivation, world domination. So I've been talking about Dr. Hans Kammler, the SS Obergruppenführer, who, towards the end of that Second World War, had access to all areas of secret air armament projects for Hitler. Worked with Werner von Braun. Worked with Walter Dornberger, the Vice President of Bell Aircraft, United States. And nearing the end of the war, Dr. Hans Kammler decided to use the V2 rocket technology and scientists as bargaining chips to gain his freedom. So on April 2nd, 1945, 500 technicians and engineers were placed on a train along with 100 SS troops and technicians and engineers, and were sent to a secret alpine location in where? Bavaria. Where else? If you've listened to A View from Space on AM 640 Toronto Radio, you will know that Bavaria is the home of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, better known as the Windsors in Buckingham Palace. Also, Bavaria is the home of Joseph Ratzinger, or now known as Pope Benedict XVI. So, a couple of days later, on April 4th, 1945, von Braun requested permission from Kammler to resume project research, to which Kammler replied that he was about to disappear for an indefinite length of time. This was the last he was about to, or the last time anybody ever saw Hans Kammler. He disappeared. This guy was an incredibly, had an incredibly large advantage when it came to negotiating for his life with the Allies. Kammler's disappearance is, of course, very bizarre, until you consider the possibility that he possessed plans for a technology even more advanced than the V2. Did the Third Reich, or an extension of it, have the capability to produce a UFO, or the clout to deal from a position of strength with one of the Allied nations? Well, my answer would be a loud yes. It is assumed that Dr. Hans Kammler committed suicide when he was about to be apprehended by the Czech resistance in Prague, but there's no definite proof of this. So what really happened to Hans Kammler. How about he, along with many other high-ranking Nazis, survived the end of the war and escaped to an unlikely location? Hard to believe? I don't think so. If you have something the Illuminati needs or desires, it doesn't matter what you did or who you are. Just before I get into Canada's connection with flying saucer and that phenomenon, let me just take a quick call. Hello, sir.
Yeah, it's Tom here.
AM 640, Toronto Radio. I'm the Spaceman. Please tell me, Tom, what you do for a living.
I'm in advertising distribution.
All right. And you bill yourself as a UFO investigator, is that correct?
That's correct.
At what capacity? For magazine, television?
Well, I did publish a magazine at one time.
So you have a vested interest in this, or is it just something that you do as a hobby?
As a hobby.
Okay. And you say that you have actually, and this is the reason why I took your call, that you have actually interviewed one of the pilots that have flown one of these saucers.
No. You remember a gentleman that was deported to Germany, Ernest Zundel?
Oh, sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I bought a book back in the 70s, published by Zundel, called UFO, the Nazi Secret Weapon.
I know about it and he just jumped on the UFO wagon to press his other his other agenda. But go ahead, continue.
So I contacted Zundel when he lived down on College Street, I think it was. This is going back to the mid-70s.
Sure.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And he led me on to a gentleman in Burlington who owned a repair shop, like for Porsches and Volkswagens and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
He's a German gentleman. And he was, I would say, in his early 60s when I met him. Okay,
so that would place him maybe late teens in the Second World War, at the end of the Second World War.
Could have been. It was 1942. This event took place over Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
So he gave me the address, and I phoned the fellow up, and he told me to come down and talk to him. And it enlightened me, I'll tell you, because this gentleman was very sincere, and he was a Luftwaffe test pilot. And he was flying one of the planes over Berlin in June of 1942 when this saucer-shaped object came into view and totally disrupted his guidance systems on his plane. And
exactly what I've been explaining.
Same as Bermuda Triangle events, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And he said that this craft had the technology to go from 0 to 5,000 miles per hour in less than 15 seconds. But they couldn't put a pilot in it because of the G-forces. This astounded me when I was talking to this gentleman. He was very sincere. Now, this was June 1942. They had this craft flying over Germany.
Mm-hmm. These are the fireballs that I was talking about, and the pilots, the Allied pilots, would call these the Foo Fighters.
No, this was an actual saucer-shaped craft. This was not a light.
But
this is daytime. This happened. This is daytime. It happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he identified the craft in his area he was flying. It came right close to him and totally disrupted his guidance systems on his plane.
Well, that's exactly what I was talking about. See, some of the fireballs are round, and some of them were saucer-shaped. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about the exact same machine that I have been alluding to here on the show. Now, why would Ernst Zundel put you on to this gentleman? Did you inquire about him?
Well, no, I told him. He knew I was a UFO investigator.
Oh, okay, I get the picture. All right.
And when I contacted him, he said, "Do you want to do me a favor and interview this guy?" And I thought, well, gee, this is a real chance for a good scoop. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I went out to Burlington to Brand Street, and he had a repair shop just south of the QEW on Brand Street in Burlington. And I had a long chat with this guy.
And he convinced you?
Absolutely.
Well, because I'm absolutely and totally convinced that those Foo Fighters that the Allied bomber pilots saw were real. Tom, I thank you so much for the confirmation call.
No problem.
Thank you, sir. Now, I just want to take you from Burlington now. I want to take you to Malton for the Canadian connection on this. The opinion of Illuminati-controlled history is that while many highly advanced weapon designs were on the drawing board, with some actually being put into limited production in the final months of the war, nothing with the design or performance characteristics of flying saucers, though, was ever built in Nazi Germany. And yet, in 1953, only 8 years after the end of the war, right here in Toronto, the Toronto Star announced that a flying saucer was being developed by the A.V. Roe Company. That's A.V.R.O.E., the A.V. Roe Company, now known as the Avro Canada Company. Its facilities were in Malton, just out by the airport. According to the report, apparently leaked by a well-informed source within the company, the machine would have a top speed of over 1,500 miles an hour. This understandably provoked a sudden and intense interest in the subject from a lot of members of the press, who asked for clarification from the Canadian government. A statement was released saying this: the defense authorities are examining all ideas, even revolutionary ones, that have been suggested for the development of new types of supersonic aircraft, also including flying discs. This, however, is still in the beginning phase of research, and will be a number of months before we are able to reach anything positive, and 7 more years before we come to actual production. Now, on February 16th, 1953, C.D. Howe, the Minister of Defense Production, told the Canadian House of Commons that the government was studying new fighter aircraft concepts, adding weight to reports that the Avro is even now being worked on in a mock-up model of a flying saucer capable of flying over 1,500 miles an hour and climbing straight up in the air. Less than a couple of weeks later, February of 1953, the Avro president, Crawford Gordon Jr., wrote in the company's journal, "One of our projects can be said to be quite revolutionary in concept and appearance. The prototype being built is so revolutionary that when it flies, all other types of supersonic aircraft will become obsolete." This is all that Avro Canada are going to say about this project. This statement was followed by 2 months of silence, then another revelation in the Toronto Star. April 21st, 1953, Field Marshal Montgomery, Old Monty, became one of a handful of people ever to see Avro's mock-up of a flying saucer, reputed to be capable of 1,500 miles an hour. The guide who accompanied Monty quoted him as describing it as fantastic. Security precautions surrounding the super secret were so tight that 2 of Montgomery's escorts from Scotland Yard were barred from the screened-off area at the Avro plant. On April 21st, the Toronto Star added that the flying disc was constructed of metal, wood, and plastics, and referred to it as a gyroscopic fighter with a revolving gas turbine engine. Little more was written in the Canadian press until November 1st, 1953, when a report, brief one too, appeared stating a mock-up of the Canadian flying saucer, the highly secretive aircraft whose existence few believe, was yesterday shown to a group of 25 American experts, including military officers and scientists. This $200 million prototype was also known as the Avro Omega. This is the picture John sent me earlier in the show, when I stated that I'd hope I could get to the Canadian connection with the flying saucer, and here we are. Now, the Avro Omega was named probably because of its not because of its shape, but it was more like the Greek letter than a perfect circle. The press claimed the Canadian government planned to deploy squadrons of these flying saucers for the defense of the far north of the country. Their VTOL, their vertical takeoff and landing capabilities, making them ideal for forested or snow-covered terrain. Once again, it was followed by a period of official and press silence on the matter, broken only by the revelation that the project's principal designer was the aeronautical engineer John Frost, and persistent rumors that the United States military had become involved. I pick up the story on the other side of the hour. Spaceman, AM 640, Toronto Radio. Back with more in a moment. This is Spaceman on AM 640, Toronto Radio, talking about the Canadian connection with the flying saucer Nazi connection. Right here in Malton at the AV Row. Now, this was later changed to the Avro Canada Company. John Frost, persistent rumors said that the United States military had become involved. John Frost, the head aeronautical engineer at AV Row, a Brit, was the head of this entire project. He said this ship will be able to take off vertically, to hover in midair, and to move at a speed of about 1,850 nautical miles per hour. That is, it would be capable of performing all of the maneuvers that flying discs are said to be capable of. And, of course, as I said, this astonishing craft, the brainchild of the English aeronautical engineer John C.M. Frost, who worked, by the way, for the Havilland factory in England during the war, and who later went on to AV Row in Malton, Canada, to set up the building of this aircraft there. John Frost is your connection from Britain, who would have brought over the Nazi designs here to Canada in Malton. And this aircraft was supposedly going to be built for the United States Air Force. And wouldn't have been the first time that Frost had designed an aircraft for the United States Air Force. A couple of years before this, he had designed and submitted to American experts an aircraft that would be called the Flying Manta because of its behavior on takeoff. It more or less resembled the disc of today, but it could not take off vertically. And its top speed couldn't exceed any more than 1,430 nautical miles per hour. The Manta had interested the American General Staff, but because of the operating deficiencies, it was decided that they wouldn't be building it. These high hopes for the U.S. Canadian flying discs were dashed when, on December 3rd, 1954, the Canadian Defense Ministry suddenly announced that the project was to be abandoned on the grounds that the technology required to make it work was too expensive and speculative. Nearly a year later, though, on October of 1955, the United States Air Force Secretary Donald Quarles made an intriguing statement through the Department of Defense press office saying, "We are now entering a period of aviation technology in which aircraft of unusual configuration and flight characteristics will begin to appear. The Air Force will fly the first jet-powered vertical rising airplane in a matter of days. We have another project under contract with Avro Limited of Canada, which could result in disc-shaped aircraft somewhat similar to the popular concept of flying saucer. While some of these may take novel forms, such as the Avro project, they are direct line descendants of conventional aircraft and should not be regarded as supernatural or mysterious. Vertical rising aircraft capable of transition to supersonic or horizontal flight will be a new phenomenon in our skies," he said, "and under certain conditions could give the illusion of the so-called flying saucer." This is in 1955. And he went on to say, "I think we must recognize that all other countries also have the capability of developing vertical rising aircraft, perhaps of unconventional shapes. However, we are satisfied at this time that none of the sightings of the so-called flying saucers reported in this country were in fact aircraft of foreign origin." Is he admitting that some of the aircraft that have been spotted as UFOs were actually their test flights. Even if you forget Quarl's surprising statement, the Avro company was in fact going through strange times following the cancellation by the Canadian government of the contract of the CF-105 Arrow, the Avro Arrow, on the pretext of the diminished air threat from Russia, which had only a limited number of intercontinental bombers. So that decision threw 10,000 people off work, most of them specialists working on the Saucer project, renamed the Avro car, by the way. It wasn't until August 1960 that American authorities decided to allow the press to see the prototype. Its performance was less than impressive. It managed to do a little more than just hover a few feet above ground, prompting the official statement that even for this type of vertical takeoff and landing plane, the principal problem was low speed stability. And if you follow the history down through, of course, Avro, Canada, slammed their doors shut, and everything was moved to Area 51 in the States. And you know as well as I do, Area 51 is the place where they introduced the crash landing and the aliens aboard the saucer. So the saucer was actually groundwork done here in Malton at Avro, perfected at Roswell, a fake crash set up, and that's where the alien whole mystique of extraterrestrials coming to Earth originated. Area 51. The show that follows this one, Coast to Coast, and Art Bell, made an entire career of selling that fact of interstellar travel by aliens in spaceships. You'll hear that show when this one leaves the air later tonight. And who knows, maybe that legend, mystic, purveyor of Illuminati ideas will be on. But you can see how it came from Germany through Frost at de Havilland in Britain, through to Avro, Canada, here in Malton, and then to Area 51, Roswell. And the alien piece of the puzzle was added. Spaceman back with more and more on AM 640 Toronto Radio, tackling the abductee topic next. I'm Space. It's A View from Space on AM 640 Toronto Radio. Never before handled the subject as a topic on the show of UFOs. Tonight is the very first time. I do think we are alone in the universes. I do think there are UFOs. I believe that they are being shown to a select few. And I've documented in the past 2 and a bit hours that they were started and researched and developed at the end of the Second World War with the Nazis and Hitler. With the V-1 rocket, the V-2 rocket, all the way up to the V-7. Does anybody know what the V stands for? Well, I'll tell you. The V stands for the Vril Society. The Vril Society is a luminous lodge combined with the political ideals of the Order of the Illuminati with Hindu mysticism, also Theosophy, and the Kabbalah. The Vril Society is a secret society that had everything to do with solar worship, alien civilizations, and Atlantis. The Vril Society, the V rockets. Are you beginning to see through the haze? Now let's tackle the tough one. Save for the last hour on A View from Space on AM 640 Toronto Radio. The abductions. Because any theory of the origin of UFOs must, of course, take into account all the available evidence, and this includes reported encounters with and descriptions of UFO occupants. After offering you proof positive that the UFOs are man-made aircraft, inspired by designs developed by Nazi scientists in the Second World War, and then finished off and perfected by the Western and Eastern powers of Russia and America and Britain. But what about the stories of people who claimed they were abducted by aliens inside flying saucers? What about extraterrestrial beings? Let's look at some alleged contacts with UFO occupants. Over the decades, since the modern era of UFOlogy began with the Arnold sighting in 1947 and the Trent sightings in 1947, people all over the world have claimed to have encountered an incredible variety of creatures linked with UFOs on the ground. In the 1950s and 1960s, these people were known as contactees, and according to their testimony, man's got nothing whatsoever to fear from these extraterrestrials. They're almost always described as being tall, strikingly attractive, with long, sandy-colored hair and blue eyes, description which resulted in their being called Nordic aliens. This was the first description of the aliens. Not the one we know today, the Greys. I'll get to that. The most famous of the 1950s contactees was George Adamansky, who on November 20th, 1952 encountered a man claiming to come from Venus. George Adamansky, a self-styled philosopher and mystic, give you a little hint right there, what's going on, was running a hamburger stand a few miles from the Mount Palomar Observatory in California when he encountered this being from Venus. He says he drove into the desert after telling his friends to stay behind. They allegedly saw this gigantic cigar-shaped object in the sky. He says he witnessed the landing of this disc-shaped scout craft. When the ship's single occupant appeared, Adamansky was able to communicate with him through a combination of hand signals and telepathy, and learned that the Venusians, together with other intelligent races throughout the solar system, were deeply concerned at humanity's misuse of nuclear energy, a theme that would be repeated again and again by these contactees, and of course put into all the television shows and the movies at the beginning. In common with the other contactees, Adamansky's claims suffered from egregious scientific inaccuracies. One of them was this inability of all the other planets in the solar system to support intelligent humanoid life. In Adamansky's case, this oversight got even bigger by a comment he made by two followers about prohibition. During this period, he had secured a special license from the government, it seems, to make wine for religious purposes. he found a monastery in Laguna Beach, with the result that he claimed to have made enough wine for all of Southern California. If it had not been for the repeal of Prohibition, he told his friends, I wouldn't have to get into this stupid saucer crap. So it was a scam for him. The contactee, very famous Adamansky, claims of the 1950s are rightly regarded as extremely dubious by most ufologists. But in the decades since, there have been many contact claims that demand more serious attention. When you look at reports of encounters with UFO occupants, particularly since the early 60s, you see that they all have one thing in common, and that is the abduction, where witnesses are taken from their normal environment against their will and are forced to interact with various ways with apparently non-human entities. One of the most famous abduction cases happened on October 11th, 1973 on the shores of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. Charlie Hickson, Calvin Parker, fishing in the river when they witnessed the approach of a UFO. The following day, the United Press International News Service claimed this report. Two shipyard workers who claimed they were hauled aboard a UFO and examined by silver-skinned creatures with big eyes and pointed ears were checked today at a military hospital and found to be free of radiation. Jackson County Chief Deputy Barney Mathis said the men told him they were fishing from an old pier at the west bank of the Pascagoula River about 7 o'clock in the evening when they noticed a strange craft about a couple of miles away, emitting this bluish haze. They said it moved closer, and then it appeared to hover about 3 or 4 feet above the water. Then 3, whatever they were, came out, either floating or walking, and carried us into the ship. The officer quoted Hickson as saying, the things had big eyes. They kept us about 20 minutes, photographed us, and then took us back to the pier. The only sound they made was a buzzing, humming sound. They left in a flash, they said. Sheriff Diamond said these are reliable people. They got no reason to say this wasn't happening and it wasn't true. He said the spacecraft was fish-shaped, about 10 feet long with an 8-foot ceiling. Occupants were said to have pale, silvery skin, no hair, long, pointed ears and noses with an opening for a mouth and hands like crab claws. Inside the UFO, the 2 men were placed on a table, examined with a device that resembled a huge eye. They were later interviewed by Dr. Alan Hynek, the astronomer whose work as a consultant for the United States Air Force UFO investigation project Blue Book turned him from skeptic to a believer. Hynek concluded that Hickson and Parker were in a state of genuine fright. Dr. James Harder, a consultant for the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, who also investigated that case, described the UFO occupants as automata, or advanced robots, judging from the witnesses' descriptions. A lot of people are skeptical of UFO and alien abductions, and quite reasonably that an advanced spacefaring civilization would not need to conduct the highly intrusive and traumatic experiments on human beings that their representatives are reported to contact. They repeatedly take samples of blood, flesh, sperm, ova from unwilling subjects. That implies a curiously primitive medical technology for beings allegedly capable of building interstellar spacecraft. But there is an intriguing correlation between the atrocities committed by these aliens on their human victims and those committed by the Nazi doctors in the concentration camps during the Second World War. This just may well be an ongoing and, for the moment, very highly secret Nazi plot to create a master race from the raw material of humanity in its present form, or build cyborgs? One of the most impressive and carefully investigated abduction cases happened on August 26, 1976. 4 art students, Charlie Fultz, Chuck Rack, and brothers Jack and Jim Viner, were on a camping trip on the Allagash River in Maine, the United States. While fishing in a boat on the East Lake, they watched the approach of a large spherical light that frightened them considerably. The next thing they knew, they were standing on the shore of the lake watching the object shoot up into the sky. There was nothing left of their blazing campfire, just a few glowing embers, implying that they had been away for several hours, although they only remembered being on the lake for about 20 minutes. A few years later, the case came to the attention of the respected UFO researcher Raymond Fowler, who investigated on behalf of the Mutual Network for UFOs, the largest civilian UFO organization in the world. Fowler arranged for the 4 witnesses to go through this hypnotic regression to recover their lost memories of the evening. Each of the men, who had promised not to discuss with each other their individual hypnosis sessions, recalled being taken to the UFO through a beam of light. Once inside, they encountered several humanoid entities who forced them, apparently through some form of mind control, to undress and sit in a mist-filled room. Their bodies were examined, probed with various instruments. Samples of saliva, blood, skin, sperm, urine, feces were taken. When the examination had been completed, the men were forced to walk through a circular doorway. Once through, they found themselves floating back down to their boat through the light beam. Fowler later discovers that Jack Viner had had an anomalous lump surgically removed several years later. The pathologist who examined it was mystified at it. So it was sent for analysis. The Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia. At Fowler's request, Jack Viner asked for his medical records and discovered that the lump had been sent to the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in Washington instead of the Center for Disease Control. When Fowler phoned the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology for an explanation, he was told the public information officer that the AFIP, the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, occasionally assisted civilian doctors. So when Jack asked why the lump was sent to the Army rather than the Center for Disease Control, he was told his surgeon secretary that it was less costly, even though Jack was covered by insurance. The Pascagoula and Allagash encounters have the same hallmarks of the typical UFO abduction: initial appearance of the extraterrestrials and the taking of the abductees, medical probing, sexual activity, returning of the abductee to their normal environment. Next, the newest description of aliens called grays, when I return on AM 640 Toronto Radio. This is A View from Space. I'm a spaceman. This is AM 640 Toronto Radio. Talking tonight about the mystery of the UFO, actually demystifying it and giving you positive proof that the machines are built by us. More precisely, research starting with the Nazis, playing into the hands of the Illuminati, and then spreading the technology to Russia and America and Britain, and building it from there. Now in this final hour, I just wanted to tackle the topic of the abductions, because that is also a large part of this phenomenon. And it's always the same. Initial appearance of the extraterrestrials and the taking of the abductee, then the medical probing with various instruments, machine examinations and mental testing, then sexual activity in which the abductee is sometimes forced to mate with other humans or even with the entity themselves, and then finally the return of the abductee to his or her normal environment. All 5 steps constantly repeated on all of the stories. It's all like a format, like a ritual. What's behind it? Listen. Although there's an extremely wide variety of alien types that have been encountered by people all over the world, one type in particular has become more and more commonly reported, particularly in North America, than any other. The so-called gray is now seen as the quintessential alien being, and is one of the most immediately recognizable images in today's world. As a matter of fact, as I started the show off earlier this evening, I stated that possibly in the 20th century, one of the greatest icons is the flying saucer, the unidentified flying object. And I would say another icon of the 20th century, and now burgeoning into the 21st century, would be that instantly recognizable image that is burned into everyone's head. I mean, we are brainwashed to believe the alien looks this way. You say you don't know what I mean by what a gray looks like? Yes, you do. The gray's physical appearance looks like this. Usually described as approximately 4 feet tall, although some are as tall as 8 feet. With extremely large craniums, big head, enormous jet black almond-shaped eyes. There's your giveaway. They have no nose, no ears to speak of, merely small holes where they should be. Likewise, their mouths are usually described as no more than lipless slits. The torso and the limbs are described as being very thin, almost stick-like. And more than one abductee has reported the impression that they seem to be made of an undifferentiated material with no bone or muscular structure. Their hands are long and thin, sometimes with 3 fingers, sometimes with 4. Also, the Greys are always said to be rather uncaring in their attitude towards humans, treating the abductee like laboratory animals are treated. Like our scientists treat animals in a lab. They've also been described by some as militaristic and by others as hive-like in their behavior, as if they had no individual consciousness of their own, but were carrying out commands from a higher source. These Greys or creatures may well be cyborgs. Well, what's a cyborg? Part human, part machine. I mean, haven't you seen the brainwashed movies of The Terminator? Arnold Schwarzenegger? The Bavarian? Now governor of California? They are biomedically engineered humans and machines. And you can't tell me that's impossible, because there are people around that are walking around with an artificial heart, artificial limbs. Heather Mills was dancing on Dancing with the Stars with one. This idea is purported to be a certain extent by medical research that's been carried out since the 1960s, mixing man and machine together, man and artificial parts. Although this research was at the time very highly secret, the gruesome details have since come to light in the form of books and articles that describe not only the nature of the experiments conducted, but also the frightening attitude of some members of the medical profession. According to Dave Fishhawk, even today there are people who believe that convicts, especially the criminal lunatic, and even conscientious objectors, should be compelled to lend themselves to science. Not long ago, I did the show in Virginia Tech with Cho, a definite Manchurian candidate. His mind was altered. What about altering a body? The direction that medical research has been going in for more than 30 years now, that probably was started in the Nazi concentration camps with the doctors like Mengele and his experiments, move into the area of artificial organs. Not only medical specialists, but mechanical, electrical, chemical, and biomedical engineers, as well as biochemists and polymer chemists, are busy in operating theaters, enthusiastically engaged in surgery connected to the development of artificial substitutes for vital organs like the liver, lungs, pancreas, kidneys. And how about this big push that's on for organ donor? How about that? Looking for spare parts? Can you put it past them? Can you say, no, every single one of these organs that we get is going to someone and we'll give them a better life? It's always for our own good, remember. What about for projects that are their pet projects, like making and actually constructing an alien to fool you completely and totally when the time comes to unveil them? It's not beyond the realm of possibility, and it's probably more likely than it is to not be. I mean, after all, look at the horrendous things they've done. Cyborgs, greys, aliens, all emanating from the Area 51 so-called extraterrestrial spaceship crash, where they discovered the extraterrestrials. What a hoax. Back with more in a moment. It's AM 640, Toronto Radio, Spaceman. It's Spaceman on AM 640, Toronto Radio. Speaking about abductions in UFOs and what's behind it. And who's to say that they aren't real? That these abductees are actually being taken aboard machines that we have never seen, but have proof that they may exist because of the technology that's gone before it, and what they obviously would have now. And that these experiments, or these tampering with these human beings aboard, are nothing more than a highly secretive continuation of the Nazi practices in the concentration camps during World War II, only now done cleverly concealed as alien abductions. You have to admit, it is conceivable. After all, if man can think it, someone will try it. So, as I was saying, the direction of the medical research, it's been going on for more than 30 years, especially in artificial organs and transplants. And why do you think, for a moment, why they try to separate twins that are born in that are connected at the head? They don't do it to try and save the lives of them. The medical profession does it to learn from it. That's really what they're all about. I don't believe for a moment it's about giving them a better life. Although that may be a consequence of their work. But I think first and foremost they are actually, I think doctors today, the vast majority, it's all about the knowledge. Very few people, I believe, go to medical college today because they want to help people. I believe because they want to make money. And fewer are going into it because you don't make as much money as you used to. But this organ donation thing gives me the creeps too. There's a huge push for it. To the point where, okay, we're taking anything we need from your body as soon as you die, if you didn't say don't. And maybe in some cases, even when they said they don't, they do anyway. I mean, how do you know what they do with your body once you're dead? What, is your mom going to check, see if you're all there? I don't think so. How do they know what was missing? My first apprentice job was with an undertaker. I took it for about 3 days. See ya. Not going to hang around dead people all my life. Can't get there. But just take everything out of you. If they throw it away, or they save it, who's to know? So there's been a lot of great interest going as far back as 1967 in the possibility of transferring the entire head of one human being to another. That's their dream now. Switching human brains from one head to another would be complicated and costly, but by simply switching heads, only a few connections need to be severed and then reestablished in the neck of the recipient body. And you may be sitting back going, this is the most absurd thing I have ever heard you say, Space. AM 640, Toronto Radio, View from Space. But this procedure was already successfully carried out on monkeys. Yeah, they have already done it at a Cleveland clinic. Each head apparently retaining its own original mental characteristics, too, when it attached to its new body. In other words, if a monkey had been aggressive before the operation, it would remain that way when its head was transplanted to another body. The eyes of the monkey followed the people as they walked past, too, implying that the heads retained some level of awareness. The experiments of these procedures on these monkeys only lived for about a week, but the fact remains these ideas are being not just thought about, but being carried out. Already did it with monkeys. It's the same thing with such stem cell research. Do you actually think the Illuminati is sitting back going, ooh, this is too unethical. Can't do this. Of course not. They're thinking things like, well, The main problem in a procedure of this kind would be the regeneration of the severed spinal cord so that the brain could send nerve impulses to its body. As a matter of fact, June 1976, a Soviet scientist named Levon Medellin reported from the 4th Biennial Conference on Regeneration of the Central Nervous System that he had succeeded in regrowing the spinal cords of rats. How? Stem cell research. That's the answer. Without a doubt. If you can think it, these people will try it. This area of research is continued behind closed doors at military and scientific establishments, all controlled by the elite rich. Sure, it's reasonable to suppose that if this is the case, scientists have progressed well beyond the level of rats and are looking for a human being to do it on. You can't help but what conceivable use such barbaric experiments could possibly have for humanity. What is mercifully unlikely is that head transplants will never really be in vogue or popular, but the research undoubtedly holds a lot of potential for the enhancement of human beings who will eventually conduct routine work in hostile environments, like walking on the ocean floor, or maybe outer space, or maybe fusion of a sort between human and machine, which has already been achieved in the form of the so-called cybernetic anthropomorphous machine system. Slave machinery that mimics the movement of human operators. In an aerospace conference given in Boston in 1966, engineer William Bradley, who developed the idea of cable-less man-machine manipulator systems for the United States Department of Defense Institute for Defense Analysis, stated his belief that man and machine would eventually be linked in such a way that by performing the maneuvers himself, the man could cause them to take place through a machine at a distance of thousands of miles. This concept led to the weapon aiming system devised by the Philco Corporation for the United States Air Force, where the pilot's helmet is coupled with a computer system that allows him to aim and fire his weapon automatically by merely swiveling his head until a camera located in his helmet shows the target. So it's already happening. How about this? They make an alien because these saucers can move at such an incredible rate of speed. Make an alien out of a human being that can actually withstand that kind of G-force. Because right now, the average United States Air Force pilot or a Canadian Air Force pilot gets into a cockpit of an F-18, he can't push that airplane to its capacity, right to its envelope, because his body cannot stand it. The machines are getting past the capability of the human body to withstand the G-force. Then how about Illuminati thinking here? How about restructuring a body that can withstand the G-force? As well, excuse me, as early as 1967, United States Air Force scientists succeeded in transmitting thought impulses to a computer using a variation on Morse code composed of long and short bursts of alpha waves. Alpha waves, by the way, are produced by the brain when it's at rest. This technology has developed to the point where today we have the potential for amputees to control their prosthetic limbs by means of nerve impulses directly from the brain. Are they that far away from engineering a cyborg? Have they already? Is this the alien invasion spoken about by Werner von Braun on his deathbed? Space back with more in a moment on AM 640 with a closing segment on A View from Space. UFOs. Alien abductions. Aliens. All covered tonight on View from Space on AM 640 Toronto Radio. You can email me your thoughts if you got them. If you got information. Space at 640toronto.com or spaceman at 640toronto.com. You know, in the field of organ transplants, we've seen incredible progress over the last 30 years, and it's certainly not rash to suggest that we will soon see common artificial hearts, common other organs routinely replacing those damaged through illness or accident, be commonplace. Almost cannibalistic, isn't it? To think some guy in China speaks out against the government there, ends up in prison, and they sell his liver to somebody in Homestead, Florida. That's what goes on in places that are out of control. Places that have no rights for human beings. How far are we away from really having about the same rights as that guy who speaks up against the government in China? Because if your local authorities have their way, you're going to have to say something, or they're going to be like a Tomb Raider and take everything out of your body they want. Then there's just one little step extra that could be so quickly taken. They take the organ before you're dead. Yeah, because you're in a compromised position. Yeah, because maybe you're in a mental institution. Well, yeah, maybe you need emergency surgery. You're in jail. Oh my God, you went back there with only one kidney. But you don't know. You just had emergency surgery. And they're telling you everything will be fine. It's not like you can go into your pocket and check to see if both your kidneys are there. So it's that fine line. Not a lot of difference between China and our side of the world where things are going. And likewise, in spite of concerns with the ethical implications of human cloning, we may also see the day when human organs are produced in the laboratory, ready for transplanting when the need comes. In view of the fact that research conducted under the aegis of national security is between 10 and 20 years ahead of what is made public at any particular time. For instance, work on the stealth fighter began in the mid-70s through the public. Was only made aware in the late 80s. It's possible, perhaps, likely, that advocates in the field of medical and bioengineering research have already extended into the realm of what the public would consider science fiction. I believe that what the public knows is merely the tip of the iceberg, and reminds us that the United States Navy, Air Force, Army, government agencies like NASA, all the top secret research establishments in the White Sands Proving Ground and similar areas have a particular need for advanced man-machine manipulations, or cyborgs. The creatures seen in and around landed UFOs could be these cyborgs. Human beings, radically changed, fixed up, fitted by sophisticated mechanical prosthetics. When you think about it, theoretically, the lungs of these creatures would be partially collapsed, and the blood in them artificially cooled. The cyborg's respiration and other bodily functions would then be controlled cybernetically with artificial lungs and sensors which maintain constant temperature, metabolism, and pressure. Doesn't matter what the external environmental fluctuations or forces are. So, even if not protected by any anti-gravity or propulsion system, they would not be affected by the extraordinary accelerations and direction changes of, say, a flying saucer, a spacecraft. Something that could be in view 1 second and gone the next. Let me put it into an area where you can understand it. When Captain Kirk turns to his man on duty on the bridge in Star Trek and says, "Warp factor 5. Let's go." The cyborgs would have no independent will. They could be remote controlled, both physically and mentally, even across great distances, by computer-linked brain implants. Since this operation would render the mouth and nose unneeded, those would be sealed and completely non-functioning. If we remember the basic description of the Greys I described earlier, with their slit-like and apparently useless mouths, slits for noses and thin torsos, we can begin to see a frightening correspondence with the theoretical human-built cyborg, a nightmarish combination of genetically engineered humanity and highly sophisticated machinery, to a startled, disorientated, terrified UFO witness. A creature looking like this would surely look like nothing on Earth. In fact, it would look like an extraterrestrial alien. It's conceivable that the humans, or Nordic aliens seen by abductees on board UFOs, are actually the controllers of those Greys and cyborgs. It's also conceivable that these humans are members of an ultra-secret group existing completely independently of any nation on Earth and hostile to all nations and all humans on Earth. They are the Illuminati. I'm Space. This has been A View from Space on AM 640 Toronto Radio.